Dear sister, dear brother, dear friend, good morning again. First of all, I want really to thank all the leaders of this seminar, including John, for inviting me here, because it's such a great pleasure to be able to share our experience together with so many brilliant minds. So I try to do my best. Before we start, I would like, as we've done yesterday, I would like to invite you to a moment of silence. But just before we do it, I want to share something with you. As some already knew, I'm a musician, okay? I'm playing violin in a symphonic orchestra, and I'm sure you've went to see some concert or even on the TV. When you go to a concert, the first thing you see is tuning. Usually, they start with the strings, and they tune on an A, which is these days 442 Hertz. It used to be 435 long before in the Baroque period. And then, if you listen very carefully, you'll see that the trombone, are tuning on another note, which is a B flat, because those instruments were built in their major resonances, major harmonics are on the B flat or E flat, where the violin is on the A and some other instruments are in some other tune. So it means that, and it's interesting to note, that we have diversity inside unity. Because in fact, the B flat I'm talking is directly related to the A. It's a perfect interval between that. So from that, what I would like to share is the fact that when we are all diverse in our own personality, but we know that unity is everywhere. And when we do, like we will be doing there, a moment of silence, we try to quiet down the ever going on stream of thoughts. And by doing that, like Meister Eckhart explained, or St. John of the Cross, we clean the temple of the soul for the divine to come in us. So let's have a quick moment of silence. Thank you. Okay, so this morning we will talk about, as it says on the slide, a quest for a bridge. We will talk about process. We will talk about history of how did we perform in that area, which is finding correlation between theosophy and science. And we will do a little bit of physics at the end, just to take some example to illustrate the things. So talking about science and theosophy is more generally science and tradition of the world, there is often a sense of imbalance on the quantitative and qualitative aspect of it. Quantitatively, as of today, there are 7 million scientists all over the world doing theoretical and applied science in more than 250 academic disciplines. They publish more than 1 million papers per year, and their annual budget represents almost 2% of the world GDP. It's useful to know that, because we realize that when we used to talk about science and theosophy, we often have the mind of what was going on 100 years ago. Today, we have a new world in front of us. They are living in a no-border world with the universal language, mathematics, and all papers are now published and or translated in what became a standard language, English. They, together with the scientific application developed by the industry, have created a tremendous capability to influence our way of living and thinking, and also an increased capability to destroy humanity. In addition to the nuclear threats, We are now facing new threats like nanotechnology, genetics, engineering, and one which is the combination of many uncontrolled industrial development and which will affect not only some isolated spots, but all life on Earth, which is the global warming. Qualitatively, science is influencing deeply the shaping and behavior of our modern society, for good and not for good. It looks gloomy, but is this assessment of the situation new to us? Some 35 years ago, David Bohm, a scientist and philosopher, wrote, "Thus, as is now well known, this way of life has brought about pollution, destruction of the balance of nature, overpopulation, worldwide economic and political disorder." And at the end he says, "It's an environment which is neither physically nor mentally healthy for most of the people who have to live in it." And it was already a long time ago, if I can say so. And at the same period of time, Krishnamurti also had something very similar, stating that we are facing a tremendous crisis. And a crisis which almost no one can really solve. It's like, I think Tim had this phrase during the IPF, he said, "You cannot solve a problem at the level where it was created." And that's exactly what Krishnamurti also is saying, stating at the end that it is in our consciousness, in reality, the problem. So it's not a new departure from past history, but we can observe that there is a strong acceleration in the degradation of our natural and social environments. So the question is not anymore about is it true or not, but can we do something and what can we do? Science being one of the three pillars of theosophy, it must be a powerful lever, especially at a time where the majority of our brothers and sisters believed in the capability of science to bring comfort and happiness in their lives, even if it's not yet the case. Science and tradition of the world, together with Theosophia, are dealing with the same object, reality. Even if the approaches are different, there is only one reality. We know that modern science is dealing with some layer of reality, mainly the physical one, plus some glimpses of the energetic, emotional, and mental ones. But it stops short at the intellectual border, even if intuition is stepping in unconsciously in some or most of the major discovery, which seems to happen per chance. The end result of this approach is that science cannot build a holistic understanding of reality, and many key characteristics of the scientific model are still not at all understood. For example, the standard model, which describes elementary particle constitution and behavior, cannot accommodate gravitation, does not account for dark matter or dark energy, does not account for neutrino oscillation, a lot of phenomena which can be seen, experimented, but not understood, or at least not put back in this model. We still don't know why most of the fundamental constant value, like the gravitational constant, the Planck constant, the Hubble constant, have their specific value, and if they are really constant or not. If on one hand, science cannot build a holistic model of reality, and on the other hand, tradition of the world have this holistic vision embedded in their sacred text, there must be a path to bridge the two. Because again, reality is one, even when viewed through different eyes. Let's remember how Madame Blavatsky described this reality. She called it this beingness, symbolizing the secret doctrine under two aspects, fundamental aspect. The one, on one hand, absolute abstract space, representing bare subjectivity, the one thing which no human mind can either exclude from any conception or conceive of by itself. And on the other one, absolute abstract motion representing the unconditioned consciousness. That's a very, very important statement here, which can really guide us in our quest. And she had that consciousness and matter are not opposed, but complementary. She says spirit or consciousness and matter are, however, to be regarded not as independent reality, but as the two facets or aspects of the absolute, Parabrahm, which constitute the basis of conditioned beings, whether subjective or objective. Bringing this model to the forefront of science should enable new foundation for a global understanding of it, and a new way to do science. To use the words of HPB talking about the soul of new science, she says a science which has the view of the cosmos as embodied consciousness, with everything in the cosmos alive and governed by the consciousness centers which embody themselves. If and when that model will be understood and acknowledged, a real revolution may start in the scientific community, and therefore in the rest of the world. So the next question is, why it did not happen yet? There is such a wealth of knowledge and achievement on both sides that it seems incredible not to be able to bridge the gaps. There must be some serious reason that we have to understand and recognize if we want to give some chance to our endeavor. First of all, and it's not a surprise, the mindset of the actors, which is the result, as we fairly know, of conditioning. All conditioning factors in our human life, birthplace, family background, education, religion, events in life. If we take as an example on one side, the example of a Westerner born in a conservative Catholic family, educated in materialistic school system, who succeeded in his or her career and became a celebrity in modern mainstream science. And on the other side, a child born in India from the Brahmin caste, raised in the pure tradition of the Vedas and deeply versed in the study of the sacred text, we can understand the almost impossible gap which prevents effective communication. Of course, this is an extreme case, and there are, fortunately, examples where each party can connect with the other one with an open mind. The wisdom tradition provides such a level playing field to enable all cultural backgrounds to understand each other. That's the magic of the wisdom tradition. The second major roadblock we have to recognize and to overcome is the difference between methodology used to dig into the mystery of life. I'm sure you're very familiar with this approach. We have tradition on one side, who are using a top-down approach, where science is using a bottom-up approach. These two methodologies have their merits and shortfalls. The top-down approach starts from a set of model or truth, often coming from revelation. This model allows a complete description from the abstract concept down to the observable, through some logic which is not always explicit, at least for ordinary people. It gives a complete description of reality. It may lead to some dogma because usually each of these reality, because each tradition has its own description of reality, are not challengeable easily. The bottom-up approach starts from observation and tries to reconstruct the underlying model. It is heavily biased by the instrument of observation and by the fact that there is no guiding principle except mathematical logic and consistency. At the same time, it gives complete freedom to the seeker in interpreting in interpreting the data and the model. And it can also lead to some dogma, like reductionist, materialistic, from when science tries to speculate on the overall scheme of man and the universe. One thing to be noted on the holistic deductive approach is that I put a dotted line between fact and theory, because sometimes we don't really do that, and maybe it's missing to make sure that what we can see, sense, is really in accordance with the theory. So that's something we may need to concentrate on that. So both approaches can bring to us some glimpse of understanding, but neither of them are self-sufficient, at least in the present state of the world, in its cycle of evolution. And again, because reality is one, there must be a point where these two cross over, and where it must be possible to draw a line or a bridge between the two. The third difficulty in this approach is the language. Language is always a barrier to overcome, either by learning the other one language or to use a common language. Science uses mathematics, which has the advantage to obey a strict logic. It has the inconvenience, especially with modern science, to be almost unreachable for many people. On the other side, tradition uses very allegorical and veiled language, some of them having completely disappeared from the surface of the earth. Sacred texts have been copied and modified so many times, including on purpose, that it is very difficult to capture and understand the core teachings. Theosophy is using the language of the tradition of the world, quoting many sacred texts and deciphering or restoring some of them. But even for theosophists, it requires a lot of study and practice to get a clear picture of the fundamental of life. So the task requires an unbiased mind, sharp intellectual capability, a methodology, and a language which can pave the way for a common understanding. Back to the question, what can we do? Maybe we want now to have a look at what we've done in the past and what we are currently doing as theosophists. And it may be not, it's certainly not complete what I will show, because that's through my vision on specific part of the world I'm probably missing. So help me if I'm missing something important, please. It all started in 1925 as a theosophical project launched by the headquarters of the Theosophical Society in Adyar. Annie Besant, then president of the Theosophical Society, together with George Arundel, decided to start a Theosophical World University. The objective was a vital need for the introduction of theosophical inspiration and understanding into every branch of human study and research. Pioneers of this university were people like Dr. Kuzan in Adyar and Professor Marco in London. Later on, the educational work was delegated to Theosophical Research Center at the national level. This triggered the organization of National Theosophical Research Center. One of the most ancient old one is probably the London Theosophical Research Center, started in 1934 and active under this name until 1982. It's interesting to take a look at its objects, which were in line with the initial object of the World University. First of all, to ensure that the Theosophical Society shall receive the full benefit of every advance in science, medicine, art, education, and other realm of knowledge. Then, to influence the world of thoughts by the application of theosophical principles. The way to achieve this goal were very focused on building bridge between science and the Theosophical tradition. The science group of the Theosophical Research Centre in London, methodology was, and it's useful to go back to those things, to reinterpret in modern terms of the occult teaching as given in the Secret Doctrine, another book, to attempt to correlate occult teaching with modern science, and to develop more popular expositions of theosophical ideas in the language of today to appeal to scientifically minded people. I remember at this time we were in the 1930s, something like that, so there was already the need identified to develop more popular exposition of theosophical ideas. TRC in London was very productive and published many transactions and books on various subjects like archaeology, medicine, psychology, physics, cosmology, and so on. A science group journal was published starting in 1957 as the official organ of the group. It includes articles from other Theosophical National Research Centres like TSA, Holland, Australia, and so on. Many other national sections developed such research centers and published bulletins like, for example, Theoscientist, Holistic Science and Human Value, Bulletin of Theosophy Science, and we know the Theosophic Science Group newsletter in Australia. And there are probably, again, more than that. So we have a legacy of researcher and a legacy of research paper in our hand. They may be somewhere in library in the world. The momentum created at the launch of the project in the 30s generated dynamism and a great motivation inside the theosophical community to acquire scientific knowledge and to study and detect potential bridges with the wisdom tradition. We also have outstanding individual contribution made by some of our past leaders and by other theosophists and affiliates. The most well-known is The Occult Chemistry, of course, with which first glimpse appeared in Lucifer magazine in 1895. First edition was printed in 1909, followed by a second edition in 1919, and finally the third one published in the 50s under Gina Rajadaza. It may be the first time scientific investigations were made using wisdom tradition as a theoretical basis and extrasensory perception as a tool. It has triggered a lot of interest and further works, working for a match between many of modern scientists' discovery until now. We probably all know and may remember Heike Temny, who published Science and Occultism, Lester Smith with the Occult Chemistry Reevaluated, Ravi Ravindra recently, who wrote Science and the Sacred, and Eddie Billy Moria, who make a nice synthesis with The Snake and the Rope. It was in 2006, about everything which was known at this time. A very prolific author, I just want to stop a little bit on it, is Dr. Stephen Phillips, because that's almost amazing what he has been writing. He started in the 1980 with his first extrasensory perception of quarks. I don't know if you ever read it and understood it, but it was one of the first attempts to correlate the quark theory with the occult chemistry, and it's quite an interesting things to read. Then he wrote Anima, which is a way to explain remote viewing of subatomic particles in 1996. In 1999, he reviewed completely his books from 1980, publishing ESP of quarks and superstring, including, again, the 20 years discovery in science to reevaluate his assessment of the situation. And finally, in 2009, this one is really something you want to take a look at it. The mathematical connection between religion and science. That's one of the best probably and most current synthesis of the state of the art in physics and other science under the light of the wisdom tradition. Most of the recent scientific discovery are reviewed and presented. Superstring, membrane, M-theory, supersymmetry, supergravity, ESP, and many things like that. Plus a lot of study in Kabbalah and astrology related to mathematics. He has been really putting mathematics in music, if I can say so. And this work deserves attention. Having said so, what do we do now? I mean, we've seen what we've been doing for the last 70 years. What do we do now? At the time where mundane science is skyrocketing in terms of advance in discovery and knowledge acquisition on the physical plan, Theosophical Research Center seems to have lost some of their initial momentum. Many have stopped their activity, even in large and highly developed countries like the USA, and the remaining active cells are barely known outside of theosophical community. Few are connected with a scientific group, and among theosophists at large, the follow-up and understanding of scientific discovery and model are scarce. It does not mean that we have lost pace with scientific knowledge acquisition, because many individual theosophists are active in their scientific domain. It means that as an international group, we are not using the potential synergy which organized groups can deliver. When you see how the scientific community is working, it's just incredible. Let's take the example of the CERN in Switzerland, where the LHC is. There are 2,000 scientists coming from 54 different countries, working like a single man. So it's feasible, and it's very powerful. Among our international theosophical community, we probably have champions. We have convinced in many scientific disciplines who could develop study group on specific subject using a common methodology. It would enhance the understanding of the scientific aspect of the wisdom tradition, and it would enable dialogue with the scientific community. And it would also probably help the community of theosophists to be more familiar with science advancement and discovery. Now, inside the scientific community, it may be useful to note that something is going on. Something is really changing. It's the beginning of a steering movement to escape from purely materialistic dogma. Even if it represents a very low percentage, it's less than 2 to 3% probably of the mainstream scientists, it is a sign of openness toward a broader understanding of nature. There is a recent example. In 2014, a group of scientists, they call themselves Open Science, including Mario Beauregard, Rupert Sheldrake, Charles Tart, and other PhDs, they create a movement aiming at opening the landscape of science. Their purpose is to discuss the impact of the materialistic ideology on science and the emergence of a post-materialistic paradigm for science, spirituality, and society. And it's interesting, if you're curious, you go to their site and you'll see they've written down a manifesto there is 14 points on the manifesto. And I just quote those two because I think they are self-speaking. They say that mind represents an aspect of reality as primordial as the physical world. Mind is fundamental in the universe. It cannot be derived from matter and reduced to anything more basic. And mind are apparently unbounded and may unite in ways suggesting a unitary one mind that includes all. They must have been theosophists, those guys.
Intelligence came first.
Yeah. Another example is I'm sure you're familiar, the Institute of Noetic Science in the US, which sponsored ESP experiments using scientific method. Among their recent achievements is the reporting of scientific demonstration of the existence of precognition and telepathy. it's very clearly, they said the result of the experiment indicate the likelihood that telepathy exists. It is as close to proven as contemporary science can establish. So it's a very political, polite way to express it. But when you go to the proceeding of this study, they've used, first of all, scientists and scientific method, basically. And they come up with a very clear figure, statistically speaking, that it cannot be due to chance, but it must be a phenomenon. What we can get from that it is that this is important. It has always been important to try to demonstrate ESP and so on. I have the feeling that it is not enough. Because once you've demonstrated something, everyone go back to his work, and that's okay. You need to modelize it. You need to try to transpose what you've been discovering and demonstrating with a model which can be understood. And I know it's very, very, very difficult, not to say impossible, but no, it's not. Impossible is not a French word, so sorry. So that's important. After the proof of the existence of something, we need to work on trying to put some model on that. What do we have else? Another institute for the venture science to incubate and nurture venture science in order to foster the kind of scientific innovation that shows potential for leading to scientific breakthrough or even scientific revolution. So those guys are not doing science, they are financing science, which also is something interesting to know. It even exists an International Academy of Consciousness. Could you believe that? Madame Blavatsky would have been delighted. Which is committed to the investigation of the consciousness, its capacity to manifest outside of the physical body, and a comprehensive associated range of parapsychic phenomena. Among their study theme, we find relevant themes like extra-physical perception. Something interesting, I think there is one of the other speakers who will talk about that, I think, detection and measurement of bioenergy using magnetic resonance imagery, synchronicity, coincidence, karmic event, and so on. It's funny somehow that we see emerging such approach. That we should have been doing that. Maybe we have done it, but not probably enough in the public. The scientific world is starting to open up. It is an opportunity to build bridge. Let's now have a look at a recent discovery as far as they may open some passage toward a wider understanding of nature. On July the 4th, 2012, the CERN announced the discovery of the Higgs boson, the famous God particle, which gave mass to particles responsible for the electroweak interaction, and other particles like the electron and the quarks. Its discovery took more than 40 years since it was hypothesized in the 60s. It is for physicists a crowning victory which validates the standard model, the model which explains property and forces between elementary particles. And it also validates one of the most important mechanisms in the creation of the physical universe, the creation of mass through the breaking of symmetry. This Higgs field is therefore supposed to pervade the entire universe. It is supposed to contain pure energy which is transferred to particles under the form of mass. Speculative theories are also proposing the Higgs field as the energy of the vacuum, therefore the source of the physical manifestation throughout the Big Bang scenario. An energy field which participates to the creation of the universe, which pervade all space and which enabled the materialization of energy into massive physical matter, may ring some bells in our theosophical model of the manifestation of the world, what we call cosmology. The breaking of symmetry mechanism reminds us also in the old Indian tradition of the gunas, which are in perfect equilibrium as Prakriti before the manifestation, and which balance is broken after the third differentiation during the world reawakening process. Another important discovery was announced on April 2016, the first ever detection from the Earth of gravitational waves induced by the merger of two black holes in space 1 million years ago, weighing 25 times the mass of our Sun. This physical phenomenon was predicted by the general relativity paper published by Albert Einstein in 1916. Just 100 years between prediction and measurement. We can say that physics may need reincarnation for the sake of continuity. Like for the discovery of the Higgs boson, technology evolution was the enabler of these findings. In one case, one has to be able to spot a particle which mean lifetime is around 10 to the minus 22 seconds. And in the other one, the relative strain variations induced by gravitational waves in a Michelson interferometer is in the magnitude of 10 to the minus 21. This latest discovery validates another aspect of general relativity model and delivers the first assessment of potential existence of the graviton, the hypothetical quantum particle supposed to carry the gravitation interaction. But it still does not tell us what is gravitation, neither what is energy or space or time. Let's talk a little bit about gravitation, that's my preferred subject. It's probably one of the most fundamental forces in the universe. Apart from the fact that it allows us now to stay on our chair, it is the active agent which assembled the physical particle of the universe to build galaxies, solar systems, stars, planets, moon, comets, whatever. It is also the mechanism which initiates the lighting up of the stars like our sun, and therefore the production of light and heat which are nurturing every life on Earth. It's quite interesting if you, and I'm sure you're curious, if you take a look at the fusion process. Fusion process occurs in the core of the sun where there is something like 15 million degree K. You just cannot imagine what it is. We call it plasma, but it's a mix of energy. Here we have, due to the extreme temperature, a lot of movement, as you can expect, and there are collisions between mainly the proton. And there must be, there is what we call the Coulomb barrier, which avoids two protons to go together to close. And there must be a lot of energy to bring two protons together. But it's not enough to generate the start of the fusion. They need to be close enough, but that's where quantum reality is taking place. Because in fact, the phenomenon is the quantum tunneling, which starts the fusion process. And what is interesting, it's a three-phase process, is that at one point in the second phase, there is generation of photon, very high energetical photon, the gamma ray. And we receive those photons, not the one which are generated at this stage. But could you believe that when we receive or when we see a photon from the sun, it took 1 million years to escape from the sun. So it's not new light somewhere. And why that? Because it is so dense that the photon is always colliding with everything and changing its frequency and so on. And after 1 million years, it can escape the sun, and then 8 minutes after that we got it. So it's magic somewhere. We just do not have a satisfactory scientific model to describe gravitation. It is one of the major challenges for modern science. There are, as of today, no model which can accommodate all the movement of celestial body in the visible universe. Observations have spotted two departures from the mainstream model, which is the general relativity. the movement of stars at the periphery of the galaxies, which is faster than expected, and the apparent accelerated expansion of the visible universe. And what happened then is that to avoid discarding the current model, scientists have invented the concept of black matter and black energy.
Dark energy.
Dark energy and black matter, yeah. What does Madame Blavatsky told us about gravitation, apart from the statement that science has no idea what it is? She wrote 2 paragraphs in The Secret Doctrine. One is named Is Gravitation a Law and Life Force of Gravity. She said, it is the sun fluids or emanation that impart all motion and awaken all into life. In the solar system, it is attraction and repulsion, but not as understood by modern physics, and according to the law of gravity, but in harmony with the law of manvateric motion. She affirmed also that all motion are related to the ether pervading all space. She also said that gravitation is but an electrical force. That's mind-boggling somewhere, for a scientist at least. So, where can we go from that? Is there any obvious correlation with modern science? Because we don't have a direct access to the law of manvateric motion, we may want to consider the aspect of the ether, because there is a similar description in the general relativity model. According to Albert Einstein, and it has been experimentally verified for the last 100 years, the universe can be represented by a matrix of space-time, a virtual geometry, where any mass or energy modify the geometry, and all celestial bodies must move along the path defined by these geometrical lines. No more need for attraction, centrifugal, centripetal movement forces. It's a pure interaction between space and matter energy. Matter energy curves the inner geometry of space, time, and space-time tell to the celestial body to move along the lines of the universe. So general relativity theory deserves some attention, because from it 2 major theories were born. The first one is the creation of our visible universe, the Big Bang, even if it can be contested, and the constituent of it, the nucleosynthesis, or how matter and force were born from pure energy. We have a lot of material in our theosophical text on this subject. And the second one is the black hole theory, which bears some similarity with our Laya centers. Back to gravitation, we also want to take a look at the hypothesis of an electrical phenomenon. Such an idea was elaborated and put in equation in 2006 by 2 Swedish scientists, Zeng Johansson and Pete Johansson. Their starting point is a redefinition of the structure of the vacuum as uniformly filled of electrical neutral particles called vacuons, as you can see on the sketch, which are at rest in the absence of external disturbance. These vacuons are composed of what he named an N vacuoleon and a P vacuoleon, both being endowed with electrical charge. From this hypothesis, and using known law of physics, classical quantum and relativistic mechanics are redefined, providing a model for the unification of the fundamental physical force. As you can see, not going into much detail, he is speculating that below the ground state of the vacuum, there is another ground state for the vacuoleon, which is at rest when there is no perturbation. And when there is perturbation, there is, how can I say that, a differentiation between the P vacuoleon and the N vacuoleon, which then appear at the vacuum level, and that we can measure it. It's called the Casimir effect, which can have an effect on physics. So, obviously, such an approach was rejected by the mainstream scientific community, not a surprise, and the author could not even publish their thesis in Nature or Physics Review. This is not to say, here it is, we find it. It is just to illustrate one point. Creativity is key when current models are trapped in dead end and cannot describe adequately what is observed and measured. We will need such an approach to propose brand new models capable to translate the wisdom tradition knowledge in an understandable vocabulary for the sake of dialoguing with scientists. This is what Annie Besant and Charles Leadbeater have done when they wrote The Occult Chemistry. They also start with a redefinition of elementary component of the universe. The ether of space, the koilon, the ultimate physical atom, the UPA, and the microscopic atom, MPA, which describe the spatial organization of physical atoms. So a lot of things around gravitation and general relativity. A quick word about energy. We talk a lot about energy. It's another key element of the physical universe, and not only the physical universe, of course. Honest scientists like Richard Feynman say, we know that we don't know what energy is. It's a scalar quantity which can manifest in many different forms, like potential gravitational energy, kinetic energy, mass energy, electromagnetic, so many. So it is eternal and unchanging, quantitatively, even if it manifests itself under various forms. Madame Blavatsky gave us his clue in her secret doctrine. She said, the theosophists, old and modern, the alchemists and Rosicrucians have ever maintained that there were no such things per se as light, heat, sound, electricity. There is nothing but radiant energy. It is interesting to note that at the time of writing of the secret doctrine, Madame Blavatsky already affirmed the equivalence between matter and energy. Now, let's have a quick look at the practical application of this concept of energy. It's not the good frequency, so... Our physical body. It is our companion since our birth until our last moment on this earth, in this life. It has some consistency, or at least we sense some consistency in it, like with most of the physical form. When we look at it, with the current scientific knowledge, we see an incredible complex machine, which is an assembly of multiple systems. And I'm going to dig a little bit in my preferred subject, which is aircraft. Like in modern aircraft, we find a structural basis, which is the bones, the articulation. We have sensors, our 5 senses. We have actuation system, the muscle. We have a respiratory system, irrigation and cleaning system, fortunately. Protection system with the immune. And a big computer, the brain and the nerves. Going in detail inside each of these systems reveal incredible capability like self-adaptation, auto-repairing, auto-reproduction, etc. It is a magical system, and we live with it. As long as science does not recognize what is behind the scene of material kingdom, they cannot understand how it really works. But let's go down inside it for a while. In each part of the material body there exists as basic component what we call individual cells. And they are almost independent organisms with their own system, and they are all interconnected. We have, roughly speaking, 100,000 billion cells in our body, which side by side would be equivalent to a 15,000 kilometer rope. They work all together, fortunately for us, on their own, to maintain the integrity of the physical body during life. Every day, 20 billion cells will die and be replaced by new ones. Replacement cycles can last from some hours to 15 years. So when we say we are old, we may remember that our cells, most of our cells have less than 10 years.
I like that.
Now, let's keep digging a little bit more. In each cells, we find microsystems made of micromolecules, which are made of molecules, which are made of atoms, as we know. There is less than 100 different atom types in our solar system and in our body. And if we go further, looking inside atom, we see more and more elementary components. We know that the atom is made of a central nucleus and surrounding electrons. And we know that almost all the mass of the atom is concentrated inside the nucleus. So let's explore the nucleus, because we want to understand from where our mass is coming from, because that's what makes us feeling it's solid. Inside the nucleus, we find protons and neutrons, and we know that each of them is made of quarks, 3 of them in each. This is what the standard model tells us, even if we cannot directly observe them because they obey a physical law called confinement, which forbids them to escape from their shell. We finally reach what is today known as the elementary state of matter, which is endowed with mass, the quarks. We could say that we know where mass is hiding, but there is a trick here. The mass of the 3 quarks in each proton of neutron accounts for less than 2% of the mass of the proton or neutron. Where is the mass? Where is what we call matter? It's coming from the binding energy called the gluons, which bind the quarks together inside a particle. In fact, the mass we can measure is coming not from particle but from energy. If we know, okay, now let's go back from the atomic level to our body. If we can really imagine this elementary level back to the scale of our body, we realize that our physical body is 98% pure energy moving, the rest being point-like particle. And I mean, it's something very deep to realize, not only intellectually, because it gave us a real clue about that physical layer, which is just energy moving. At this smallest stage of the physical matter, there is no more difference between the unit we are contemplating. Our physical world, including our body, is but a wheel of pure energy. If we were able to contemplate this level of atomicity, we would see, and therefore being completely convinced, like St. Thomas, that we are made of pure energy, and that what we call matter does not exist per se. This is how far modern science can have a glimpse to reality, but because it misses the holistic vision of it, it cannot go further. It is now time to go back to the wisdom tradition. We remember what was said at the beginning about the oneness of the beingness, symbolized under 2 aspects: absolute abstract space and absolute abstract motion, representing unconditioned consciousness. In an article published in Lucifer in 1890, Madame Blavatsky said, quoting Rama Prasad, "It is that wavy motion which is the cause of the evolution of cosmic undifferentiated matter into the differentiated universe. From whence does this motion comes? This motion is the spirit itself." So we have, our body is a set of energy in which spirit is pouring and making it move. spirit as cause of the motion of pure energy leading to the manifestation of the world. That brings us to the description of the nature of matter in the occult chemistry. A substratum, the ether of space, the koilon, everywhere present, into which the spirit outbreathing makes bubbles. As a conclusion, we can say that we are here with examples of the foundation of two pillars for a bridge between science and tradition. And there are many other ones, in many other different aspects. Being able to develop and complement the scientific model with perennial knowledge has a lot of potential benefit to overcome the current materialistic trends. As heritage holder of the wisdom tradition, we have the responsibility to engage in this quest. Let's do it. Thank you very much.